Okay, bot conversion time. We're going to be converting a bot from botbuilder.net v3 to botbuilder.net v4. I'm using this intelligent apps example, Contoso Help Desk chatbot. We'll go through these steps of updating and adding NuGet packages. Then we'll modify global ASAX and the bot config, explaining these steps. Then we'll get into the message controller and how we inject the configuration in the accessors, along with creating the bot adapter and the dialog set. Finally, we'll go over converting the dialogues to v4 and the v4 dialog stack. So let's start by updating NuGet packages. Currently 4.20 is the latest. We'll also update BotBuilder Azure to 4.20. You can remove this history package. It doesn't exist in 4.2 and it's not used in this project anyway. And we need to also install BotBuilder dialogues. And FormFlow is in a community library now for v4. Finally, we need AutoFac Web API to do the Web API controller injection. Now we'll go into global ASAX and remove these as well as the update conversation container. It doesn't exist in v4. Then in bot config, we'll add a register method. And call it similar to this. So in here we're going to initialize our bot accessors. So we'll have to add that file. Inside bot accessors are the property accessors for bot state, including the dialog state, dialog data, and private conversation data, and user data. We won't be using user data in this bot or private conversation data. We do need dialog data and conversation data. what these property accessors are pointers into your data store. And I've added a iBot data bag implementation, which is similar to V3, so that we can have a somewhat similar conversation data construct, making it easier to convert the dialogues. So this class is basically just a holder for these pointers into your dialogue state and your conversation state. Now we'll go back to global ASAX. Okay, we added AutoFac. You should be getting a reference to AutoFac here. Let's get rid of these two references. There we go. And we're just pulling the app ID and password out of the web config and creating a credential provider. So the credential provider is then supplied to the Bot Framework adapter when we create it in the message controller later. And so we're going to inject the credential provider into the messages controller. Now we're setting up the bot state, and we're just using the memory store. We provide, Popular Azure Library provides a Cosmos DB implementation you can use as well. We're not utilizing user state or private conversation state, so we'll remove those. We're only using conversation data, dialogue data. Then we also add the bot accessors as a singleton so that they can be injected into the message controller. Next we'll go into the message controller. We need a constructor that takes those things we are injecting. Bot authentication attribute can be commented out. It's not done that way anymore. Okay, we'll create our dialogue set here also. Adding the root dialogue to the dialogue set. In V3, dialogues were handled differently. It was largely an internal construct. In V4, the developer is much more in control of the dialogue stack and how dialogues are processed and interact. Need to add a reference to the schema library. Now, our entire post method is going to change significantly here. We need to create the adapter, set up the on activity. Okay, so bot adapter contains the code for processing messages. And when we construct the adapter, we also provide middleware that will be used either before the turn or after the turn, depending upon how the middleware is constructed. So we're going to create this data bag middleware to help with the conversation data construct. inside the middleware, we implement an onTurn, and there we add the middleware state to the turn context state so that it can be accessed from within the dialogues. We're not utilizing user data or private conversation data. Okay, back to the message controller. We create the bot framework adapter using the credential provider for authentication, and then also add middleware, and we add the autosave state middleware so that after the turn, our data bags and everything in our state is auto-saved, including the dialog stack and whatnot. Now we need a onTurn async method for the bot adapter to actually send the message to be processed. Inside the turn, we ensure that it's a message. And then we create the dialog context from the turn context. Then we also check if cancel is sent. Then we cancel the entire dialog stack. And this is how global handlers can be one way for handling global messages within a v4 dialog stack. Previously, what was used were scorables, and you would register the scorable like this. But this whole construct scorables doesn't exist in v4, so we're just going to get rid of this and comment it all out. Okay, back to the messages controller. And all that scorable was doing was looking for the word cancel anyhow, so we're doing the exact same thing, just a different way. And if the dialog is not stack is canceled, then we would want to load the root dialog. Or if nothing had occurred and the status is empty, if there was no dialog to continue, then we also want to load the root dialog. So this is just demonstrating how to load the root dialog. Form canceled exception is a form flow exception, so we're going to reference form flow library here, and that can have something called quit inside of form flow. And ping no longer exists, so we'll comment that out. We can actually remove this entire method since we aren't handling events in this bot. Okay, and the root dialog is expecting the bot accessors. So we'll go fix the root dialog. Looks like we need to add a constructor. And throughout the project, we'll change all iDialog object instances to component dialog. Component dialogues allow child dialogues, and they also require a constructor that has a dialog ID, and we're just going to use the name of this dialog. And we want to keep a reference to our accessors. Okay, now we need to add the dialogues to this component dialog set. What we're doing here is creating a waterfall dialog, which is a new concept in .NET v4. It had existed previously in Node version .NET or Node Bot Builder v3, but it's new to Bot Builder v4 in .NET. And basically, it is just like the series of steps that you want to execute through a conversation or a dialogue. So we're going to have a prompt for options step and a show options dialog. Now, previously, the prompt for options would have been accomplished via the message async show options. When this initially starts, we set up a handler for the message received. That is not how it works anymore. Begin dialog async fires. Or in this case, just the initial step of our waterfall, because the waterfall is the first dialog in the dialog set. So we're not going to be using message received async anymore. And the show options is going to be different since the prompt dialog doesn't exist in v4. We also need to turn all iDialog context objects references to just dialog context. Okay, let's see. Inside the show options dialog, waterfall step, we add the code to check the choice result. So this is what will actually display the dialog after the user's made their choice. And the prompt, we use prompt async. Not sure what reference is missing here. Oh, prompt for options needs to be async. Okay, we're going to have to change this list of options so that it is a list of choices instead of a list of strings. And then we provide synonyms to the choice strings so that users can just type install password or admin. Then we use the message factory to create the prompt message. Okay, since on option selected is performed differently now, we'll just comment this out. And resuming after will also be different, so comment that out. Okay, we need a validation step to validate the choices. So we'll add that. I've already written the code over here. So that should be it. And we need to change the install app dialog is also expecting constructor with the bot accessors. We'll come over here, do the same thing that we had done in the previous dialog. Form flow is in a different library now. Okay, now we're not using a waterfall dialog here, but we are managing some state a bit differently. Previously in V3, any fields would be auto-serialized and deserialized. But in V4, the dialogues don't work that way, and the dialogues don't need to be serializable because the developer is responsible for interacting with the state. Now there's also, you can see I just grabbed this line and copied it into the begin dialog async. Start async and begin dialog async are somewhat synonymous or loosely correlate to one another from V3 to V4. But there is no post async method built into the dialog context. So we can add some extension methods to provide similar functionality or syntax. Okay, so now we can just say dialog context dot post async, similar to what we did in V3. Then we initialize some state values to ensure that they are have nothing in them to the initial values. Let's see, install app dialog. Okay, so we need to handle dialog turn and the state a bit differently than it was being done before. What we're going to do is check the dialog state to determine what is the next step that should be performed. Previously you could use context.call and context.forward with the resume after delegate, and then that resume after would receive the result of the dialog that was either called or forwarded. And those concepts don't exist now, so we're more responsible in the continue async, which gets called on every successive turn after the dialog is first loaded with the begin async. So in each turn of the continue dialog async, we check the state and determine what is the next method that should be performed. Now this could be replaced with a waterfall dialog, but this exercise is not attempting to introduce a bunch of new concepts, but rather try to convert existing dialogues into a V4 model. So that's what we're doing here. We don't need to send the activity along, but we can get it from the context. So the dialog context has a reference to the turn context, which has a reference to the activity. And since we're doing state differently, we just interact with the active dialog state, setting it as such. And this would just be name. And the concept of context.wait doesn't exist anymore. We're managing the different states in the continue method. So we'll replace these for the same reason. And there is no need for this context.done. Same thing with this step. Again, accessing conversation data differently through the accessors. something here. Once we've received the machine name, we know we've already got the app name. So we'll create the install object at this point and save it into the database. And that should do it. So the control flow is determined in this continue dialog async that gets called from the dialog set in the message controller when that dialog is the top one in the stack. When we say continue dialog async, it will be continued to be called, and then we check the state inside of the continue async to determine what the branching logic is. And when everything is finished, we return complete. Okay, so now we can move on to the local admin dialog. In local admin dialog, we need this similar constructor. We don't need that. We don't need serializable, and form flow is a different library now. So basically this component dialog is responsible just for loading and interacting with the results of the form flow dialog. Previously it was loaded with .call, and after the form flow dialog finished, resume after would be called. But now we're going to replace start async with a begin dialog async method. That finds the dialog in the dialog set of this component dialog and then calls begin dialog async. And that will fire the form flow, and when the form flow finishes, we will handle the logic for that within the continue of this dialog. So we can get rid of the resume after. Because once the form flow finishes, we will see the result of form flow as complete and process by saving into the database. Since we've removed this, we're dealing with the result instead, we'll comment these out. We could still perform validation here and it would still function as expected. We just changed the method of control flow during the dialog process. Okay, for the reset password dialog, again we have a similar constructor. Loading the form flow dialog. And then in begin async, we do what was previously in start async. Then we would handle the results from that form flow dialog in the continue as we had before. But I'll leave that for an exercise for the user. I'm just going to comment all these out, and we won't go through the reset password dialog right now. Also remove the build reset form. That's not good. We need to return something. Okay, our project should build now. Oh, I'm going to comment out too much. Should be async. All of these form flows need to be changed to the community reference. Now everything builds, we should be able to run it, test. It's opening on port 3979. Bring up the emulator here. I have a config 3979. We'll restart. Say hi. Couldn't send. Oh. Unauthorized access exception. Let's see. Oh, we have the app ID and password in the web config. And this must be the app ID and password of this bot. I'll have to let them know that they don't want to have their app ID and password. I'll have to change those. We'll just comment this out for testing without security. But valid app ID and password should also work. Okay. Back to the emulator. Restart the conversation. Say hi. Okay, let's restart it again. So that's our initial message in the root dialog. Let's say install. Windows. Yay, it's working. Okay, that's it.